Hey guys, welcome to Author on Author Interviews. My name is Lachlan Pirie and I'm an independent author. Joining me today is Jason Donald, a traditionally published author of two novels. He studied English literature and philosophy at St Andrews University and also graduated from Glasgow University's master's degree program with distinction. His first novel, Choke Chain, was published by Cape in 2009, and his second novel, Dalila, was published in 2017, and very excitingly is being produced by an Oscar-winning writer named Christopher Hampton. So thank you very much for joining me today, Jason.
You're welcome. It's really nice to be here.
So my first question always is, how old are you? And when did you first decide you'd like to become a writer?
I am 49 years old and I turned 50 in July. So I'm planning a birthday party.
You should.
And when did I decide to become a writer? I think two things happened at the same time. Well, sort of there were two decisions or realizations, maybe. The one was after I graduated at university, I had studied English literature and philosophy. And basically all we do is just read and write, right? We just wrote essays all the time. That's what we were doing. And at the end of it, I was in the pub and one of my classmates, like at the table opposite, said, I think I might just be a writer because, like that's all we ever do. That's the only thing that I've been trained to do. And suddenly I thought, yeah, maybe I should do that. And I've been writing short stories and poetry and things. And I thought maybe I should try and be a writer. And that was like a moment that sort of hit me. And then having decided to be a writer, I sort of looked back at what I was doing and tried to figure out like, what would I want to write? And then a deeper realization came where I realized I've been writing all the time. I'd written plays at school. I'd written poetry. I had journals full of stuff. I just never taken it seriously. Like when you build Lego as a kid, you never think I'm going to be a Lego engineer. You know what I mean? You just think, I just build Lego. That's what you do. Everybody does that,
Yeah.
I think that's what happened. So it was almost like I kind of came out of the closet as a writer. I was like, oh, guess what? I am actually a writer. This is a thing that I do that not everybody does to the same extent. Yeah. So those like a sort of double realization.
Awesome. I love that. So tell me about your background. It sounds very interesting. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Scotland. And when I was about 2 years old, maybe three, I moved to South Africa. And I grew up in South Africa, in Pretoria. This was the late 70s, early 80s, or all the 80s. So I grew up in South Africa during apartheid. And also we were very religious, like fundamentalists, Pentecostal Christians, a huge church that I went to. And then in 1990, we came back to the UK.
Yeah.
And since then, I've moved around and traveled around and stuff. I'm currently living in London, but moved around a lot. So yeah, apartheid South Africa, fundamentalist Christian, there's a lot to unpack. You know what I mean? I am giving you the highlights and that's it. Like there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And I think part of my journey as a human being and as a writer has been to unpack a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. So as your writing career has progressed, what's been your idea of literary success?
It changes, like before I published my first book, I wanted to get published, In fact, before I even did that, I had a poem published in a thing called Poetry Today, I believe. And I got a check for $5, like a paper check, right? And I kept it. I was like, this is it. I am on my way, because it was a benchmark. I got my words in print.
Yeah.
It was important to me. And so then obviously I wanted to get my first book published. But I think more and more the reward that I feel from being published is when I meet people, maybe online or in person, and they say that their book, my book, really moved them.
Yeah.
And I think that is a kind of fascinating thing, because my first book, Choke Chain, was set in South Africa. And sometimes people read it and then remember their childhood or a visit that they took to South Africa, and then start thinking about their grandparents or something. And those associations have nothing to do with my novel, have nothing to do with me. But there's some power in putting words on a page that deeply affects some other human being, and they're emotionally moved by that. And I have been a small part of that process. I think that, to me, is very rewarding. I don't understand that whole process, but it's what art is. It's that ability to move someone, another human being, through something that's really tiny and banal. We've only got 26 letters and a couple of punctuation marks that we scribble down on paper, and somehow that moves another human being emotionally and intellectually in a very deep way. I'm always surprised at that process. It's fascinating. And if it works, even just to a small extent, I think that's literary success. That's me doing my job.
Yeah. That's
No,
an amazing answer, Jason. I love it.
I'm going to amend my answer a little bit. That's not me doing my job. That's me being part of a process, because I don't even intend to do that. Like I'm trying to write a good book, but that connection that I have sometimes with readers, I'm just sort of honored to be part of it. I don't really fully understand it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So this ties to what you just said. But is there a particular genre or theme that you like to focus on?
No, I didn't think about that at all when I started writing. Like I said earlier, when I was a kid, I just used to write stuff, So I would write an X-Men story, and then I'd write a play for school, and then I'd write something else. I never thought, this is my genre, this is what I should do, this is what I want to focus on, So it was very eclectic. And when I started writing my novel, I thought it was going to be short stories or something. I was just moved to write, and I just did. And the idea of a genre was very much, well, wasn't even there, I've come to realize now that I suppose literary fiction is what I write, and it is a genre. So I guess I do that, but it's not my intention to write that,
Yeah, interesting. So I tend to ask this with each author interview. And this is sort of my final author related question. If you could do something as a teenager or young adult to become a better writer, what would you do?
That I would do as a teenager to become a better writer. I guess I would read more.
Yeah.
This is a very personal answer, because again, I was raised very fundamentalist Christian, We were raised in an environment where listening to quote unquote secular music was forbidden, I read I've read the Bible twice all the way through. I know it really well, I've read a bunch of Christian books, but I was very late to reading the classics or other kinds of literature, I think that's why when I went to university, I was quite voracious about wanting to read all of philosophy, all of literature. Like, I was just like a kid in a candy store, it was. And so maybe there's a bit of a regret there, where I think, how much further would I have been in my reading if I'd started when I was 8 or 10 or whatever.
Yeah. Very interesting. So, did you plan out your first book at all, or did you just sit down and let it rip?
A little bit of both. So I collaged my book, is maybe a better way of saying it. I think when people talk about planning, they sort of think what's happening in chapter 1 and then chapter 2 and chapter 3 in a kind of linear way, and you've got your character descriptions or breakdowns, and you've got like plot points and stuff.
Yeah.
That is a very valuable way of planning. I've never done that, but people do, and it works. When I wrote my first book, and I guess even the second one, but certainly the first one, I had big scenes that I just felt compelled to write.
Yeah.
And so I just wrote it. And then I thought, well, this is going to be a short story. And then I had a series of short stories, maybe 10 or 12 short stories. And one of the things that happened to me was I was doing this creative writing MFA, and my mentor, tutor, supervisor was this woman, Janice Galloway, who, by the way, is a genius, and you should read all her books. Like she's like a cornerstone of contemporary Scottish literature.
Mm.
So to be in her presence was intimidating and exciting because she's just a brain, you know?
Yeah.
So I give her a story and she looks at me and she says, so where's the rest of this? And I was like, well, I'm actually going to edit it down and shorten it and neaten it. And she goes, no. Like she knew more than I did already. She was like, I want to see more of this. Where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
And I started writing just stuff, just thinking, okay, what are these three characters going to do next? You know, so like, let's just take them to the shop. No, for no reason, but just let's see what happens when they do that. And more scenes came out. And then I took all the scenes eventually and sort of put them all out on my desk. And there were like short stories and everything. And I realized, okay, it's interesting to note what I've been doing without being aware of what I was doing. So in every story, there was 4 characters. And in every story, there was a strong theme about family. And there was also a kind of dynamic between the parent and the kids quite a lot, you know?
Yeah.
And so then I became aware to myself, I'm writing about a family. So let's just accept the fact that that's what you're doing. So in all the stories, I changed all the characters' names to being the same names, and I rewrote all the stories to being set in the same place.
Yeah.
And suddenly I had 12 chapters instead of 12 stories. And then you start to link the chapters and it starts to grow, you know? So you sort of start in the center and you spiral out and a pattern emerges. I don't know if it's the best way to plan a book, but it's certainly organic and it worked for me. And then certainly much later, with a much clearer intent, I sculpted the book. You know, once you've got 80,000 words, you decide, okay, how am I going to craft this more clearly into a story? How am I going to, what needs tension and not, and how are the character arcs working and things like that.
Very interesting. Yeah. And was it the same process for your second book?
A little bit. In some ways, the second book has a necessary flow chart that goes through it, because the second book is about a woman who claims asylum in the UK. It's all set in the UK, so it starts the moment she arrives in the airport. And there is a process that the Home Office here has for processing asylum claims. And it's a flow chart. And certain beats have to happen before other beats can happen, you know? So I knew that I would have to write the story in that way, in that, you know, she can't do X unless Y is done first. Or did I get that the right way? She can't do Y unless X is done. So there was that process. So I had a skeleton for a story, and then I had to flesh it out, as it were.
Yeah. Very interesting. And were there any writers or artists that you looked to while writing these stories for inspiration?
You mean like specifically for my first book, which writers influenced me for that book, or just in general?
I suppose for the first book, let's stick with that.
Then I guess the answer is no. You know, I think there was a sort of, I read quite a bit of South African writing, so J.M. Coetzee and well, like a whole bunch of different short stories and essays and things about South Africa. but it was sort of more research, trying to get a flavor for it, you know.
Yeah.
But then I was also just very excited by good writing.
Yeah.
I sort of go through a phase where I find people, and then I just read their stuff and just get really excited about it. So I read Mary Gateskill from the US. She's fierce. My God, she's a good writer. Whoa, it's like I feel like, oh my God, I'm gonna get through this book and it's gonna be a trip, you know. And Amy Hempel, I read all her stuff. She's like really good short flash fiction things. Tim Winton, you know, from
I love Tim
Australia.
Minchin. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. When I read Breath, there was something about, I don't surf, but there's something about my childhood in South Africa that sort of correlated with a childhood that he was talking about in Australia. And I loved the way he was writing. So I take those as like, I guess inspiration, but not, I'm not mimicking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So, what types of feelings are you trying to evoke from your writing?
I think in retrospect, I have to accept that I'm probably trying to evoke anger. There's a kind of like righteous indignation that comes out of both my books that I wasn't intending at first. But now when I look back at it, there's a sort of like deep guttural howl that comes out of them, you know?
Yeah.
It sort of screams, this shit shouldn't be happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is not fair. This isn't, something here is broken. Yeah, God, maybe that's the theme of my life. Maybe I need to get a tattoo that says that or something. You know what I mean? It's funny how you see that stuff that comes out. I thought I was writing a story like a choke chain about two boys, and I was. And often they're just like riding their bikes and trading cards and like hanging out, you know? And then afterwards, like a year or two later, you sort of look back at the book and you think, wow, there's a lot of like emotional churnings under the surface that's really coming out, you know?
Yeah.
And I was aware of that when I was writing to some extent. There was a strong desire to have to write these pieces.
Yeah.
And I didn't fully understand it, but I accepted that I had to do it, you know?
So, did you find you changed at all while writing your novels? Was there anything new you discovered about yourself in the process?
You should probably ask my therapist. I don't know. I don't know. Ask my wife. She'll probably tell you that, oh my God, he changed a lot. I don't. That is a good question. Have you changed when you wrote your book? Let me see if I can deflect.
Yes, I think I probably learned more about the marketing and book sort of journey process more than anything, but the actual material, I feel like it's just improved me as a writer. That's my quick summary.
Okay. I like how you avoided all sort of emotional growth or intellectual growth. Oh, good. I think I might do the
opposite.
exactly. Yeah, I also learned about the book industry. No, I don't. It's a good question. I think for sure I grew, but I'm trying to be honest in my answer where it's quite difficult to say how deeply it affected me or how much I grew. You know, it's a difficult thing to measure. Certainly with my first book, I came to see that I confronted a lot of issues in my family.
Yeah.
But not enough. There's more to be explored, but that was a real starting point for a kind of journey that I'm going on. I say journey, I hate that language. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That process, that mental mud that I'm sifting through, you know?
Yeah.
There's something going on there that I'm still figuring out. And then with the second book, I had worked with a lot of asylum seekers, and I did a lot of research. I spent a year researching and visiting different places. So I visited people in detention centers, and I interviewed people, and I worked for a charity, and I just got involved in that as much as I could to keep it really authentic. But if the question is about me and how did I change, I think I began to realize that in some ways I felt dislocated in the same way that they did.
Yeah.
So on a very human, on a very human level, and I'm not trying to equate my life to their lives,
Yeah.
I didn't flee war or anything else like that. But there was an aspect of me that came from Africa to the UK when I was 16 or 17, and I felt lost. I felt completely disconnected from the culture and other people my age, and I was just literally on the other side of the world, And it's interesting talking to people and seeing that in their face and connecting with that and realizing that dislocation had affected me in deeper ways than I thought. It's perhaps the thing that compelled me to write this kind of book and to do that kind of research. So there we go. I finally got to that emotional point. I had to skirt it. Did you see? I had to skirt for a while and deflect, but I find the courage to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations, Jason. It's a great answer. So what do you resort to when you find writing gets too much for you?
So I do a lot of physical stuff.
Yeah.
Which for a while I was a bit uncertain about because I didn't feel like a real writer. I felt like real writers, squirrel away in their library and all they do is read and write, and I have friends who do that and they're really good at it.
Yeah.
But for me, I do a whole bunch of other things. So again, having grown up in South Africa, I didn't see a lot of snow. And I first got introduced to it in Scotland when I was a teenager, and since then have been snowboarding every winter for the past 25 or 26 years, every winter I'm snowboarding at some point, and I've done that all around the world. It doesn't feel like a very writerly thing to do, but it's actually a big part of my life. It's, I tried jiu-jitsu for the first time last summer and promptly hurt my knee, but I'm about to go back to it. I do some rock climbing. I deliberately try and connect with friends. I think, Annie Proulx wrote about writing and then going for a drive afterwards. And that when she's driving, and I think she lived in the Midwest, so I imagined a big car and long open roads and prairies and things like that. When she's driving, her mind is involved in working the car, some processes are driving the car and the other processes are free to sort of explore emotions and stories, and she's just thinking and processing. And she said that part was as important as bashing out the words.
Yeah.
I think I find a kind of binary thing for me too, that it's important to sit down and write, and then I need to do something else, like get on my bike and cycle, or
Yeah.
And I don't mean cycle for training, you know what I mean? I just mean cruising through the city, going for coffee, just doing something else with my body that actually helps my writing, helps me kind of process things a bit, Yeah.
So in terms of self-doubt about writing, how do you overcome that aspect?
You lean into it. You
Yeah.
accept it. You embrace it. Yeah, that's it really.
Yeah.
It's hard, and the self-doubt comes and it feels overwhelming. But a little bit as a philosopher and kind of as a person on planet Earth, you realize that the truth is always a paradox. it's always both. It's always two things happening at the same time that don't feel like they're the same thing.
Mm.
And you want the certainty of one side or the other. I'm either confident or I'm full of self-doubt. It's probably both, and you just get used to the mix where you can write, you can do it, you can sit down at the page and it's going to work. And at the same time, you also think, I'm shit. I can't do this. I'm an imposter. I don't know what I'm doing. Who the hell am I kidding? You know what I mean? And those voices sit at the same time. And you're probably never going to get away from that. You know what I mean? It's always going to be some mix. And that's fine. That's being a human being,
Great answer, Jason. I love it. So final question, what is your top tip for anyone looking to become a writer or author?
Read more.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think that a lot of people focus on writing and focus on promoting books and building their websites and all that sort of stuff. But the real engine of writing is reading, so read more and read widely.
Yeah.
I think sometimes if people I'm generalizing, right? But sometimes if you get stuck in a genre where you think, what I do is crime fiction, so I'm just going to read crime fiction and I'm going to write crime fiction. I think it's actually better to read really widely, like read gardening books, read surfing manuals, read like electronic manuals on how to fix your toaster and stuff, all of that, the style of those sentences, the way they're presented, the information that you get will all help inform how you write, so I'm certain that you'll find something in your gardening manual that will help you murder the next character. You know what I mean? In creative and interesting ways,
Yeah.
Also, you might find that you have a character who's interested in gardening and you're able to use the theme of gardening and the way that the gardening manual writes about gardening as a way of representing your character and things. So like everything is worthwhile. Don't get too like narrowly focused in your reading.
Very interesting answers, Jason. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. And I would like to chat with you again in more depth. But for anyone listening to this or watching this video, everything about Jason, I'll attach in the description, all his social links, his website, etc. But yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast or this YouTube video, make sure to check out the others. And I definitely look forward to chatting with you again, Jason.
I would love that. There's always time. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff you had to say today. But we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, thank you.